Well, would you look what's back? This 2015 GMC is back with a misfire again. It's significant. Check engine light was reported to be flashing. Service Stabilitrack. Traction control disabled. This is the one we put a push rod on, number 4. I think it was number 4 exhaust. January the 7th or 8th. It had a bent push rod. This is a common issue with these engines from 2014 on, and I don't think GM knows what the actual problem is, but we're going to scan it and see what codes it has to offer, and then maybe pull the valve cover off again. So let's scan this thing and see what's going on with it. I'd like to buy this truck some cement tires. Make it sleep with the fishes. Let's do a network code scan. Engine miss detected, P0300. Imagine that. Invalid data. Well, that's this network code U0401 in the ABS is because of the misfire in the engine control computer. Headlamp control circuit open. Security sensor data. Is that it? Not yet. Valve modules. It's P0300, but I don't think it's random. I think the miss is confined to one cylinder. Okay, let's have a look at what other codes we have. In the OBD2 side, it's P0304. So let's have a look at Misfire Counters before we clear the codes. Went to engine, data, misfire data. I could feel it shaking like crazy when I drove it in, so. Cylinder number 4 history, 54,792. So why is that random? Well, let's pull that valve cover off and have a look. So there's the valve cover off. Getting good at that. I'd say that's a problem. That's the same push rod that failed before. I'm not sure if it's rusted or if the lifter's collapsed. Maybe the lifter's collapsed this time. So the push rod actually has a small mark on the side of it. It is bent slightly, but it's the lifter that's collapsed this time. Got a borescope down there looking at the lifter, and the lifter is stuck in the down position. So when it went into displacement on demand or cylinder deactivation mode, the lifter collapses and then it's locked in that position now. So this thing, there is a way to release the lifter, but that only works on the up to 13. After 14 you can't pull the management system off the intake plenum, off from under the intake plenum, without pulling the fuel rails and the fuel injectors out. Now fortunately I did have these out a few months ago, but still I'm not sure if that lifter's turned in there or if it's just collapsed. Gonna look at the other side, the one in front. That one seems to be right in the center. This one seems to be offset to one side, so I wonder if the lifter is turned. Lifter is spun in the bore, which would mean the camshaft is toast. The guide that keeps the lifter straight is just plastic, I believe. You can see that guide that's holding it down. Look in this side here, this is the intake one. Well, I gotta discuss this with the owner. So I found an older push rod, a longer one from a different engine, and I inserted it, and I'm looking at from the intake side to the exhaust side, and watch when I move this lifter. You can see the lifter is definitely collapsed. The spring is loose. Oh well. So we have the intake off of this thing now. We're going to try and remove the valve lifter oil manifold and free that one lifter using that method that I saw on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description. Now, one of the reasons I even tried doing this was because I know I had these injectors out last summer, last May or June or something like that, and so I remembered the hassle I had getting them out. You have to take the fuel rail out to get the valve lifter oil manifold off. Now we have to take the high pressure pump off the back, and of course, if this fixes it, we're going to end up having to put all new injector seals in here. I should have some left over from that job. So there's the valve lifter oil manifold off. This is the passage here. I made this little tool based on a YouTuber's description. It's going to take too long to get it. It's got a 45-degree angle cut on the end of it. It goes in and contacts the side of the lifter. I've got to double check my angle right there. Then we tap on this with the push rod in place, and hopefully it releases. Okay, so we're going to try and tap on this lifter. Get the rod in there. Didn't work. One last attempt with a light duty air hammer. Well, so much for that. So here's the plan. We have sourced a low mileage 2015 engine. It's got 92,000 kilometers, which is just over 50,000 miles on it. Considering this has got over 200,000 and it's got a ton of idle time on it because it was a commercial vehicle where it was used in that kind of a situation, I'm going to replace the engine with this low mileage engine, because to do the lifters you got to pull the heads, at least this one head anyways, and that's fairly time consuming and fairly expensive. Do we just pull one head off? Do we pull both heads off? Do we do a delete? As I said, I've done the electronic version of the delete using AFI Live, but that doesn't remove the mechanical components. So that's it for now. We're going to replace the engine. So we're back working on this 15 GMC. We're doing an engine swap. Customer obtained a previously enjoyed low mileage 5.3 from a salvage yard. This one has 90,000 kilometers, just over 90,000, which is like 50,000 miles. And this truck behind me that the engine's coming out of has over 200k, plus it's a commercial application and it's done a lot of idling, so it's probably got another 50k of idle time. but nevertheless, I think I'm going to pull the intake manifold off to put this in, because there's not a lot of room between the top of the intake and the firewall, and it's very difficult to get at these connectors back here. We need to leave the harness in the engine bay. Plus there's one bolt here that's next to impossible to get from underneath. I've got all the bell housing bolts out now. I see a dowel pin missing on this side, so we'll have to make sure we put one from the other engine in there. I got the torque converter bolts out, starter out, exhaust disconnected, wiring harness on this side disconnected. But I'm going to pull the intake off, like this one here, because I think that'll give us a little bit more room, because the engine has to come up and it's going to contact that firewall there, I believe, because there's only about an inch between the top of the intake manifold and the firewall. So I'm going to access that one bolt back there. You can see those two connectors at the very back. I was trying to get the lifter to free up, but no such luck. Well, they sure screwed this job up. Used to be so easy to pull a small block Chevy out. They got bolts at the back of that bell housing with nuts and brackets back to the back of that cylinder head, back there. Ground straps, ground wires. You can't get at them. I can't get a socket up from the bottom. So I'm going to give up for today and start fresh in the morning. Get my topside creeper and see if I can get back there and get the bolts out. So these bolts, this one down at the bottom, this one, no problem. These two, no problem. This one with the manifold off, but this one's still a bitch to get at. And each one of these has a bracket on it and a wiring harness. This one has a bracket and a fuel pipe, and I believe it goes over to here. There's a ground strap here, there's a ground strap here. It looks like something was bolted in here too, so these three bolts are, I think we can leave the ground strap on, take it off the body up here by the brake booster. But I think this and this are attached, because I got this nut off and I can't get this bracket to move. And the bracket feeds the fuel fill pipe and the evap pipe. So boy, is this thing fighting me. I had to use an air chisel on the dowels on the bell housing liners, because they wouldn't come out of the transmission. I got it separated and lifted, but it won't come out through the top here because it's too big. And General Motors, in their infinite wisdom, didn't make this cradle or rad support removable. It's welded in place here. So I've got the cover off. I'm going to take the harmonic balancer off and the water pump housing off, and hopefully that'll give me enough room to get this thing out of here. Even if I try to turn it, I can't get it up. I took the back coil off at the back corner there to give me a little clearance on the firewall. This is steel here, so it doesn't come off. This is fighting me all the way. Well, it just barely comes out of there. Take the harmonic balancer off. I didn't want to take off that pump, that vacuum pump, because I need a new gasket for it, but if you took off that vacuum pump, it'd give you a little bit more clearance. Put a piece of cardboard or a piece of light plywood in front of the rad just so you don't mark the rad. Taking the rad out is not that easy. So we're going to get this thing out on the floor and start transferring some parts over. In case you're wondering how I got the hood open far enough, take the 4 bolts out, put 2 longer bolts in the bottom, and then tip the hood back. I put body washers so it can't fall out. It sits on these rubber mounts on the corner here, and I use a big ratchet strap to tie it to the back bumper. Hold the hood open far enough. I'm going to leave it like that till we're done. So I'm getting ready to prep this used engine. Make sure you clean all the grounds. There's a ground strap here that goes to the firewall. Ground wire here. Ground wire here. There's a ground cable behind the starter, the main ground cable there, clean that. And there's another ground wire beside the vacuum pump fitting right there, clean that one. Clean the bell housing mounting surface. I'm going to go into the engine bay and clean the bell housing with the Rolllock sanding disc. Clean the crankshaft. I got to check to see if these bolts are reusable. A lot of GM bolts now are not reusable. You might have to buy new flywheel bolts. Yeah. And of course we're going to pull the harmonic balancer off of this because we can't get it in there with it on. And we've got to get this stretch belt off. That'll come off with the puller. I'll show you how the puller works. So there's the 3-jaw puller installed. I was going to show you the part number of the puller, but the tag has gone off the box. It's just in a cardboard box. So the ears grab the outside of the pulley like so. As you can see, this belt will come off when I pull a pulley off. The other one did anyways. And then we'll put the belt on after the fact. So according to the service information, it doesn't specify that you have to replace the flywheel bolts. And the torque procedure is 3 passes, 15, 37, and 74 foot-pounds with Loctite on the bolts. So we're going to clean up the threads and put Loctite on the bolts and follow the procedure. So 15, 37, 74, and go in a crisscross pattern, just like you tighten a wheel. I put a bolt in here so that the flywheel won't turn. And when you're positioning this engine, you'll see one of the holes is oval as opposed to round. Put the oval hole over here where the starter opening is, because that's the first torque converter bolt we want to start. That one will center the other 2 bolt holes. If you put one of these in first, you may not be able to get that one installed. So there's the water pump housing gaskets, the harmonic balancer bolt, and the oil cooler flange gasket just came in. I'm going to put the cooler flange in. I've got the engine basically bolted up. I got the 2 bolts to do at the top and the motor mount bolts to do, but it's back together. Like I said, the flange gasket goes here on this cooler, and wiring harness and ground is on this side. Got to put the starter in. It's coming along. So there's the engine sitting back in there. All the stuff on the bottom end is done. I still have a bracket on the oil cooler lines, a nut to install, harmonic balancer, water pump housing, radiator cooling fans, AC bracket, alternator bracket. But those 2 bolts at the back, now with this valve lifter oil manifold on and the high pressure fuel pump, there's even less room. I got the 1 bolt started, but the other bolt, wow. And there's a bracket on the bolt, so it's a stud. Both bolts are studs with 13 mil nuts on them. Very, very bad. Can't see it from underneath even if you look over top of the bell housing, but I'm gonna give up for tonight. It's 6 o'clock. That's enough for one day. So I managed to get those 2 bolts and 2 studs. They are right down in below that harness on that side and directly below the high pressure fuel pump in the middle, or just to the right of the, or sorry, left of the high pressure fuel pump. Ground's connected to the back of the cylinder head on both sides. Brackets bolted up, clips attached, and ready to put the intake manifold back on. What I found to work best is to put a piece of square tubing across the frame rails so you can stand in the front of the engine here, because laying over the front of this, even with the topside creeper, is nearly impossible. Hope that helps somebody. So installing the harmonic balancer, polished up the seal surface with some emery cloth, put some light grease on it, put some Teflon sealant on the inside of the keyway so that no oil will migrate down the key, and installed the crank pulley with the old bolt first and then took it out. Now the procedure is you must use a new bolt because they're torque to yield. It talks about a flywheel holding tool, which I don't have, but I'll show you another method. And install the bolt and tighten to 240 foot-pounds to fully seat the balancer. Remove the used crankshaft bolt. I've done that already. Measure for correctly installed balancer. If the balancer is not installed to proper dimensions, install the installer and reinstall it. Install the new crankshaft bolt. Tighten it to 110 foot-pounds. Loosen it 360 degrees. And then tighten it to 80 or 60 foot-pounds. And then another 125 degrees using 125 degrees. Tighten the crankshaft bolt to final pass to a flanged, with the flange head tightened to 125 degrees angle meter. Oh, with the flanged head 125 degrees, with a rotating washer 200 degrees. Well, this one has a flanged head. In other words, the washer is built into the bolt. So basically 110, back it off 360, 60 foot-pounds, and then 125 degrees. Not 130. So we'll get that set up. So the factory has a holding fixture that goes in where this plastic cover is, but it's nearly impossible to get in there. So I've modified a 15/16 open-end wrench, and I put it on the lug of the torque converter, which is obviously bolted to the flywheel, and that goes up against this hole. Now I had to modify the wrench slightly. I had to make it a little bit thinner to get it in there, but that will hold. Now this is torqued to 59. I torqued it to 110. We backed it off and then torqued this to 59 foot-pounds. Now we got to turn it 123 degrees. 120 degrees is too flat, so I'm going to mark the bolt up in here so I can see where it is, and mark two flats. And we're going to have to estimate it because I don't have an angled torque wrench, and it is frickin' tight. You'll need a 4-foot bar on this thing to turn it. So I've marked the balancer where it is with a black mark on the bolt flange. Can't see it very well there. Maybe if I get up like this. And a black mark where 123 degrees is. So basically I'm going to rotate that until the mark on the at the 7 o'clock position, 8 o'clock position lines up with the white paint dot. And it takes about 250-300 foot-pounds to turn it, so you need a 4-foot bar. So there it is tightened. Like I said, you need a 4-foot bar, big heavy torque wrench, or a big heavy power bar. I use a big snap-on 1/2-inch drive one, and it's got to be by feel 250-300 foot-pounds to tighten that. And then take your wrench out. Don't forget to take the wrench out. That'll cause a problem if you don't. Well, there's the wiring harness mounted, the intake manifold on, AC compressor on, 2 stretch belts on. I find the AC compressor belt easiest if you use a tie wrap through the harmonic balancer pulley, and then walk it on by turning the engine. New hose clamps on the heater hoses. I was just about to put the belt tensioner on, and it's a little loud, so I'm going to change just the bearing. It's a 6203 double sealed bearing. I keep those in stock because it's a steel pulley. You can press the bearing out and press a new bearing in. So you can just use a vise and a socket to press the bearing in, as you can see. Not that difficult till it bottoms. So there's the pulley installed. Nice and quiet now. About 18-20 foot-pounds because it's going into aluminum. Put Loctite on the bolt just to be safe. Well, there it is, back together. Coolant semi-filled, engine oil in it, filter on it, hoses and belts all hooked up. We're going to fire it up. Moment of truth. pretty good. Put the scanner on it and run it up to temperature and make sure the thermostat opens at the correct time. Top up the coolant, put an exhaust hose on it. So there, it's all back together. Hood's bolted down, shrouds in place, oil levels topped up, coolant levels topped up. We're going to check the coolant after it goes through a thermal cycle tomorrow morning, but take it for a road test. Got to do a crankshaft variation relearn. I'm going to do that outside. Yeah, seems to be running fine. No check engine light, no misfires. So we're going to do this crankshaft variation relearn. Apply and hold the brake. It's up to 100. It's up to 70 Celsius already. During this test, you must accelerate to wide open throttle. Release accelerate when fuel cutoff occurs. That's it. Done. If you don't do that, sometimes it'll set random misfire codes that aren't occurring because this new engine. I didn't want to do that. This new engine has a different crank cam correlation than the original one, so it needs to be updated in the ECM. So we're going to look at engine data, cylinder deactivation data. Now I've tuned this with EFI Live to disable the displacement on demand, cylinder deactivation, and we're going to go for a road test now and see how it runs. So I just came back from a road test, and as you can see, cylinder deactivation system command is disabled. So through the entire 10 to 12 kilometer road test, it never once attempted to deactivate. As I said, I disabled it using AFI Live. So that's it for now. Truck runs fine. Thanks for watching. So I decided to pull the head off of this engine, and here's what happened. That number 4 exhaust lifter physically broke. It should look like this. So this piece broke inside the lifter, and the lifter was collapsed. No wonder it wouldn't pop back up, because there was no spring pulling it up. You can see the broken piece in there. Well, I think we made the right call putting a used engine in it. He's got a much fresher engine in this truck now.